Hello, fellow Star Trek fans. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Clonestar Podcast. I am your host, Mike Overton, and I am again joined by my wonderful friend, the lovely Jodie Pickens. Jodie, how are you this week?
Doing great. Thanks so much, Mike.
No worries. Well, thank you for joining me. Now, this week we're joined by a writer, producer, and director who penned 35 episodes of Star Trek Voyager, as well as directing two. He's also been involved in Beverly Hills 90210, which, well, some of you might not remember, The X-Files, Dark Angel, and of course, one of my personal favorites, Smallville. We are delighted to welcome the wonderful Ken Biller to the show. Ken, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, thank you. So let's start at the very beginning. Did you grow up in a creative household?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Nobody's ever asked it quite that way. I guess in some sense I did. I grew up in a let's say a household that definitely valued education. My dad was a college professor.
Right.
He was a clinical psychologist.
Ooh.
And my mom, who had, as happened very often back in the day, had left college to marry my dad, ended up going back to school much later and became a clinical social worker. So my mom, not brilliantly, but my mom did play the piano, and my mom for sure encouraged creativity in the household. My dad didn't necessarily discourage it, but he was much more interested in sports. But my mom was interested in music and encouraged us to not always with great success, but to take music lessons. And I took a ceramics class when I was a kid, and so I was into some of that kind of stuff. And my dad, I would say, my earliest writing really was because of my dad, because my dad published several works of nonfiction, scholarly works, because he was a scholar, and he would sit in an office. And when I was a little kid, I'd sit there with a yellow pad and, sort of pretend to write with him. So I guess now that you mention it, I haven't thought about that in a long time. So, I didn't have, nobody in my family was professionally an artist in any way, but my dad was, to some extent, part of his career was being a professional writer of a very different sort, but.
So on the music front, then, do you play anything?
Not anymore. I played in the jazz band when I was in high school. I played the alto sax, but
Nice.
I haven't picked one of those up in a very long time.
I'm a fellow saxophonist, so
Okay. Well, I don't think I've earned the right to call myself a saxophone. But back in the day, I would have. Yeah, we used to play Night Train, like one of the old standards.
Oh yeah, nice.
That's I'm awesome. A drummer. I just hit things and they make noise. So, obviously, trying to keep things on a Star Trek theme for a second. Did you grow up as a Star Trek fan?
No, I didn't. I did not. I had. I really got into Star Trek, which we can get to if you want to. Kind of accidentally. I was not really in any way a Star Trek buff. I had some first cousins, that used to really like the original series. So I was of course very aware of Star Trek, and when I would go to their house, sometimes we would, if there were reruns on Channel 56, we would watch Star Trek sometimes. And of course, I saw as a kid the movies when they started to make the movies, but I wasn't really an aficionado or a devotee in any way. No.
So, how did you? Obviously, you said that you sat with your dad pretending to write. So, was that your kind of early inspiration into the writing world?
No.
Is that what you wanted to do?
No, what I was a theater geek in college, and what I really wanted to do was I wanted to be Hal Prince. I wanted to direct and produce big Broadway musicals. And I coincidentally went to college with Hal Prince's daughter, Daisy, and we became very good friends. So I got to know him a little bit, and he helped me get a job out of college. I went to work for a Broadway producer in New York, and my hope was that I was going to continue with that and do theater. And I directed some staged readings, and I worked as an associate producer on a couple of productions with this guy named Michael Frazier, who was a semi-successful Broadway producer. And I spent about 4 years in New York right out of college working in this Broadway production office. And then it just kind of became clear that it was a very difficult way to make a living, and it was very a lot of the work was about raising money to stage productions, which was not really something I enjoyed very much. And then again, through Hal Prince, I got a job, or he recommended me for a job. I went and interviewed and got the job. I became an assistant stage director at the Lyric Opera of Chicago.
Oh, yeah.
This is a long time ago. And my thought at the time was, well, okay, this could be a really interesting career. I could travel around the world and maybe I could direct operas. I mean, I knew a little bit about opera. I wasn't an opera buff. And I spent one season, 7 months at the Lyric Opera of Chicago, which is a big star-powered opera company. Right. So Placido Domingo was there, and Pavarotti. And so what I realized working there was it was kind of all about, I was an assistant stage director. So what would happen would be these international directors would come in and they would stage a production for a couple of weeks, and I would assist them. And then the star would fly in the night before and say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to stand over here and I'm going to sing this over here. And that's just kind of how it went. And it was interesting on some level, but it was such like an inside world. I was living in Chicago. I was in my early 20s, and everybody just wanted to talk about like what dress Maria Callas wore at the 1954 production of Turandot at the Baths of Caracalla or something. And I just wanted to know if anybody wanted to go to a Cubs game. So when that was over, it was a 7-month season. I just decided to keep going, and I went to Los Angeles with a really vague and naive notion. I would think I was about 25. At that I was going to be, well, like maybe a producer and maybe a director, like maybe in movies and maybe in television. And if I had any idea how almost impossible it was, I probably wouldn't have done it. But I was young and stupid, and I had a little teeny tiny royalty. I was earning a couple of $100s a week from a production that I had been involved with in New York that was actually in Boston. It was still running, and I was getting a couple of $100s a week, and I had a credit card. So I rented a car because I had a credit card with a buddy of mine who was an actor. And we did what the kids today call couch surfing. We just basically drove around in this rental car, and we slept on anybody's floor or couch that we knew that was living in LA that would have us. And, by that time, from working in the theater and from my days being in school in theater, I knew some people who were already out in LA trying to make it as actors and writers and that kind of thing. And so I just started talking to and asking for a meeting with anybody that would sit down and talk to me that had anything remotely to do with film or television. And I'm going to shorten this just by saying I went to a series of meetings, and one person sent me to another, to another, to another. And I ended up getting a very, very, very low level creative executive job at CBS, at the American Television Network, CBS. And that's how my TV career started.
I am so curious about, because you said you didn't come from a very creative background in that regard, but yet like you determined between like high school and college that like Broadway was kind of where you felt.
Well, I was very into theater. I was always into theater as a kid, and my mom encouraged that. And I'm sorry, I don't know how to get this off. My keeps dinging. My computer just got serviced, and all the things that I had turned off have now been turned on.
So, yeah. It's always nice when that happens, and then you've got to try to remember how to turn them all back off again.
Yeah, so I apologize. So my mom I was always interested in theater. My mom encouraged that. She took me to see shows. I as a high schooler, I got involved with something called the Rhode Island Shakespeare Theater because I was kind of in. So the theater thing started kind of at a young age,
Okay.
not because anybody in my household was really involved in it. It was just something I was interested in, you know.
Yeah, that's great. And I think
Um,
it says a lot as for you as a young adult to be that it's a tenacity, right? About being able to go and just keep talking to people while you're out in LA to try and at least get your foot in the
yeah,
door. I mean,
I was very precocious, I guess. And like I said, I mean, I was kind of young and dumb in the sense that, I mean, obviously I'm an intelligent person, but I was naive about
yeah.
the business. I didn't really, you know, my first introduction to really television script writing was I went to a party when I got to Los Angeles, and I went into the room where everybody was throwing their coats on the bed, and sitting on the bed was a script, and it was a script for for an episode of the show 21 Jump Street.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
And I just picked it up and I started paging through it, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. I mean, of course, I knew if you would ask me, did people write television scripts? I would have said yes, but I hadn't really ever given it much thought.
mm,
I was very familiar with lots of playwrights, and I loved to go to the movies, but I wasn't tuned into the world of screenwriting at all. And
Gotcha.
I thought,
yeah.
oh, this is interesting, and I just kind of filed it away. And then when I got this job at CBS, the job title I had sounds much more important than it was. I was called the manager of drama series development, which meant that I would sit in these pitch meetings with guys like I am now, who would come in and pitch new ideas for television shows.
Okay.
And I was the lowest on the totem pole, so I would sit in the corner and I would take notes. And so at the time, these were people whose names I had heard from watching television, but people like Aaron Spelling and people like
Hmm.
Stephen Cannell
Yeah.
and David Milch. And these guys would come in and pitch these ideas. At the time, this was the old days where there were really only three uh, American networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC.
Hmm.
And then while I was there, Fox Television was just starting. So um, I started to listen to all of these ideas, and of course, my job was also to read lots of scripts because these networks would buy scripts from these showrunner writers,
Yeah.
and dozens of scripts would get written, and I would read the scripts, and I would write notes on the scripts and give them to my bosses and all of that. And so what I started to realize was, oh, this is how television works. All of the big bosses in TV, they're writers.
Hmm.
The executive producers or the showrunners, they're all writers. And that was not something I knew. And it's changed a little bit since then, but certainly back then, this is, back in the 90s and early 2000s, all of TV was run by people who were originally writers.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because, television is so story driven and you need so much material to feed the beast on shows that used to do 22 episodes a year that the guys, and unfortunately they were all guys back then, or almost all of them,
Yeah.
who could generate the stories, got themselves the power. And so I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. Like maybe I'm not Tennessee Williams, but I've been reading all these scripts and I could probably do that. So that's kind of like the way it started to happen.
So is that
Very
where?
observant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I remember correctly, I think your first writing credit was Beverly Hills 90210.
Yeah, that's right. So I
So
had
did
a
that come about because of that?
yes. So what happened was I had a friend named Chris Brancato, who's a very successful showrunner now. He has a
Yep.
show that's been running for a few years called Godfather of Harlem that runs
Yep.
on MGM.
Oh,
Great
yeah.
show.
Yeah. And he created the first season of Narcos, and we're very
Oh,
good
okay.
friends. We're still very close friends. He and I had been roommates in New York. He came to Los Angeles very specifically to be a screenwriter. He wanted to write feature films. And what happened was when I got this job at CBS, I got hired away a year later by Fox for like a tiny bit more money and a slightly bigger title.
Yeah.
I was able to help Chris get a couple of episodic writing assignments to write, one episodic script for a couple of different shows. And I ended up kind of moonlighting with him and helping him work on these scripts. And we decided at the time, oh, maybe we should partner up and write together. And so after a couple of years of being an executive, I went to an agent that I knew that I'd gotten to know from working at CBS. And I said, hey, you know Chris and you know me, and we want to partner up and be a writing team. And he said, I think I could help you. And he ended up doing some backstage maneuvering, and he brokered us a little tiny deal at Aaron Spelling's production company, which provided for us to write a couple of pilots, which we did. They never got made, but we wrote them and got paid for them, and also to be assigned to a show. And at the time, it wasn't clear whether it was going to be Melrose Place or 90210. This is the original 90210 for you kids out there who don't know there was one before. And so we ended up writing basically for a half a season on 90210 because we got fired halfway through because the showrunner did he loved Chris, but he didn't like me because he thought I was a spy for the network because I had worked at the network before I came and worked there.
Politics, gotta love it.
Yeah, so that was my first job.
Gotcha.
My first TV writing job, I should say.
Yeah.
So then, how did Voyager come about?
So Voyager came about because Chris and I wrote together for a couple of years, and then we had a little, I don't know, divorce. We're really close friends now, and we've worked together since. And he's a great guy, but we split up as a team, and I was struggling a little bit because I think the perception was that somehow Chris was the writer on the team, and I was the guy that had come from the network, and so I had to try to somehow establish myself as a individual entity, and that was tricky. I got a couple of little freelance assignments to write scripts on my own, and then what happened was I got very friendly with Renee Echevarria, because who was a longtime writer on Next Generation and then on Deep Space Nine.
Mm-hmm.
And my girlfriend at the time and Renee's wife at the time were very close friends. So we got kind of thrown together right about the time that Renee came to Los Angeles to start working on Star Trek.
Right.
And he knew that I was trying to figure out my next move. And he said he was working on 90210. I'm sorry. Deep Space Nine. There's a 9 in both of them. So,
could you mention that Deep Space 90102? He was interesting.
He was working on Deep Space Nine, and he said to me, "Oh, they're starting up a new series called I don't even know if it was called Voyager at the time, but he said they're starting another spinoff, and they're looking for some writers to write some freelance scripts. Do you have any interest?" And I thought to myself, well, I don't know really anything about Star Trek, but sure, why not? And he gave something I had written as a sample to Jerry Taylor,
right,
and I guess Michael Piller too. And I guess they read it and they thought it was pretty good, and they called me in, and I had a meeting with them. And I didn't know if anything was going to come of it, but at the end of the meeting, they said, "Well, okay, we want to give you a script." I said, "Great." I thought, okay, I'll I think at the time it paid about $16,000 or something to write a script, which to me was a fortune. I thought I could live half a year on that. And so I said, "Great, I'd love to do it." They gave me a story. They had a story document.
Right.
I think that the episode ended up being called Elogium. It was about going through some kind of puberty.
Yep.
Yes.
And so it was like a 7-page story document, and they said, come back with an outline. And so then I immediately panicked. I thought, I have no idea how to write this. So I called Renee and I said, "Hey, can you just send me every Star Trek script you got?" And so he sent me all these scripts, which wasn't so easy at the time, right? Because you couldn't just send me a link.
Oh, yeah. Right.
I got a stack of
have paper. Yeah.
I got a stack of scripts. I'm really dating myself here. And I started.
Right, we do it on every episode. Somehow we always manage to date ourselves. You talk about VHS or Betamax, and then
it's okay
that we've aged.
I started reading these scripts, and I thought, wow, this is really good. Like I was immediately into it. I mean, I was trying to watch episodes too, but I just thought it was great. And in the stack was you guys will know better than me because you're Star Trek buffs, but it was um, the two-parter that Michael Piller wrote on the Next Generation, where Picard gets Borgified.
Oh
I think
yeah.
Um,
it's
oh,
it's a famous
How are
two-part
we
episode.
gonna forget the name
I'm
of
having
that
a
one?
brain
We'll
fart. Hang
find it.
on.
Anyway, I thought, wow, this is so smart. This is so good. I gotta try to do a good job on
Best of
this.
both worlds. There you
Best
go.
of both worlds.
Thank you.
Parts one and two. I read
Yep.
it like I was reading like a page turner novel, and I thought, wow, this
Oh
is
yeah.
so good. And so I just thought, well, I got to try to do this justice. And so really, I went. I thought what they had asked me to do was write a whole outline based on this story, but really they were just waiting for me to read it and come back in. So when I finally called them and said, "Okay, I'm ready," Jerry Taylor was like, "Well, where have you been? Like, we were supposed to come back like a week ago." And I thought, so I came in with this whole outline with the whole script worked out, and I went into the room to break the story, and Michael Piller took my document and he went like this and he went like this and he went like this and he went, okay, and he just threw it away. And then I sat there at a board with the writing staff, which at the time was really small. I think it was just Brannon and Jerry and Michael.
Yeah.
I think it was just the three of them and me at the time, and probably an intern and somebody taking notes. And I sat with them and we broke the story out kind of beat by beat. And at the end of it, I had an outline that they had approved, and I went off and wrote the script. And I just thought I have to try to imitate the style of these scripts. I have to try to make it sound like one of these scripts. And I turned it in, and they called me, and they were like, "Wow, this is great! Like, you must really have a science background." And I'm thinking, no, I chose a college that had no science requirement. I didn't want to, because it was less about. I was always interested in science, but never in math, and so I didn't want to have to do the math that I had to do the science. But somehow I did a pretty good job of imitating it, and they offered when it was over. The show hadn't started production yet. It was. They had written the pilot and they were in prep to make the pilot. And so I was there when the whole Geneviève Bujold thing happened.
Yep.
Right.
By that point. And they offered me, I think it was like a 10-week contract or maybe a 12-week contract or something, which was, to see if I would F it up or not. And
right.
I didn't. And I ended up staying for the whole run of the show, basically. I had a very brief, I left, there were like a few episodes where I left for a very brief hiatus, but I was there for ended up there for the whole run of the show.
Yeah. So you were there really, I'm sorry, Mike, go ahead.
I was going to say, you've had quite a few different job titles throughout Voyager.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, yes, I rose to executive producer over the course of time and was the showrunner for the very last season of the show. Of course, under Rick Berman, who was kind of the uber god of all things Star Trek, right? The umbrella was, but I was running Voyager by the end. What I will say about those titles, which are really confusing, I think, is for the most part, they don't really mean a lot. Or they can. It really depends on the show. And everybody always asks me this because you'll watch a show now and you'll see there's 15 executive producers. And what I'll say is, well, only one of those executive producers, or maybe two, are actually doing anything on the show. The rest of them maybe like had some rights, or they worked to a book, or they worked at a company, or they wrote a draft and got fired and kept a title. But I think my first title was executive story editor, and then there just became kind of a hierarchy in these shows where you would go from executive producer to co-producer to producer to supervising producer. By the time and they didn't necessarily mean much for the most part, especially on a show like Star Trek. All those people were just writers. Some were more senior writers than others, but they were just writers. And weren't really involved so much in producing the show. As an EP or maybe a co-EP, you might start to get really involved in producing the show, meaning involved in casting and decisions about costumes and sets and makeup and all that stuff. So I think the titles can be a little bit deceiving.
So you were kind of there at the beginning foundation
Yeah,
of Voyager,
I
and
was.
talking about the titles and kind of rising up through the ranks of that. How different was it from that foundational point to there at the end with the final season in that
Well,
writers?
I mean, it was different in a lot of ways. I mean, first of all, first Michael left the show
Right.
originally to go do another show for UPN, and he kind of stayed on as a consultant, so he would read our scripts and send us notes. And then Jerry retired, and when Jerry retired, um, what happened when Jerry retired was I was at the end of I'd been there for 5 years, and my contract was up. I had a 2-year contract and then like a 3-year contract, and my contract was up. And to be perfectly honest, and I have no like resentment about this because I was kind of ready to go do something else. I essentially got passed over because Brannon, when I was very close with Brannon, I'm still close to Brannon. He was just at my birthday party a few weeks ago. Um, Brannon was now taking over as the showrunner. He'd been doing
Hmm.
Star Trek much longer than I had, and he and Rick wanted Ron Moore to come over
Yep.
and do the show because Deep Space Nine was ending.
Right.
So it kind I there kind of really wasn't. It was top heavy. It was top
Mm.
heavy. I thought at the time, well, I'm fine with this because I've been doing this for 5 years and it's time for a new challenge. That proved to be very challenging at the time, which we can come back to if you want. But so I left the show, and then I don't know if you've talked about this on the show, but it's talked about in this Voyager documentary that Lolita Faccio made. Things really fell apart between among Brannon and Rick and Ron left after like 3 episodes
Yeah.
Hmm.
because they were clashing, and Rick called me and said, please come back. And so I said I'll come back. He said, if you come back, you can run the show not this year because Brandon's still there, but next year because Brandon is going to be working on the another new series, which was going to be
Mhm.
Enterprise.
Enterprise. Yeah.
Right.
And I said, okay, well, I'll come back. You have to pay me a lot of money, which they did. And you have to let me bring Rob Doherty back onto the staff of the show. Rob had been my assistant on the show. He was an intern on the show,
Right.
and then he became my assistant. And then I had given him a freelance script. I can't remember which one it was, but he nailed it. And I just thought Rob was like the most talented. And so Rick said, okay. So I came back like a couple of episodes into season 6. The show was kind of a little bit of a mess at that time because they'd gotten behind on scripts. So
Mm.
really what they wanted me to do was try to, um, wrangle it a little bit, help Brandon get it kind of back on
Back on
track.
track. Yep.
And I did. I brought um, Rob in, and we hired some other people, and spent that 6th season working under Brannon, but really trying to help him. And then Brannon and Rick kind of they of course they were still involved, but not on the daily basis. I was running the show in the last season, so it was very different, I guess, from the beginning to the end. I was just
Yeah.
a very eager and grateful young writer at the beginning, and by the end, I was bitter. No, I was. I wasn't.
A
I
little,
really,
Never
maybe.
talking about
although
Star Trek
no, I
again.
really did. I really had wanted to leave after season 5. I think you don't. When you do something for so long, at least for me, I get bored. I want to do something new and do something
Yeah.
different. But I don't think you realize what a privilege and a luxury it is to have a show that actually runs that long. And of course, I know that now because I've worked on so many shows that haven't.
Right.
So I'm very grateful and glad that I ended up staying through the whole run. But at the time, I was ready to go.
Right.
Hindsight, it's a wonderful thing. So who are some of your favorite characters to write for?
Well, I'm sure everybody says this, but it's got to be the Doctor, I mean, because
Mhm.
Bob Picardo was so
That's
fun and
exactly
so
what Lisa
amazing.
and Brannon said.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he was the best. Brandon and I used to call him Dr. Fancy Pants, and most of the we didn't have at least early on when I was first starting out, we didn't have much interaction at all with the actors. In fact, there was like a rule that the writers were not
Mm.
allowed to go set or early on in the run. Later, I leveraged that new contract into saying, well, I want to direct. I mean, that's what I want to do, and I was the first writer. Rick had allowed several of the actors, of course, to direct, and some of them have gone on to big directing careers. But I was the first writer that Rick said, okay, I could direct. And so once I started directing, I only directed a couple of episodes. I was supposed to direct a third, but then when I took over the show, I didn't really have time to do it. So, but both while I was directing and while I was observing to prepare to direct, I spent a lot more time on the set, and I got to know the actors much better. But we always knew Bob, because Bob would come to the office he'd have some great idea that he wanted to tell us about, and some joke he wanted to pitch, and he was just he was a blast to write for and a blast to work with. And of course, Seven of Nine was great to write for too.
Yeah. I mean, I think
But
when we
I
spoke,
like, I mean, and of course, Kate was great to write for. I liked writing for Kate. She's just such a great iconic character.
I
So
think one of the great things about the Doctor is when you compare him to where he was in season 1, when he was
yeah,
quite literally a light bulb,
right.
all the way up to what he became in season
Yeah,
7. That's
yeah.
one hell of a story arc.
Right, and that's the thing, so much of Star Trek, like with Voyager and the original series, the people talk about the actors. I know they did all the time, like the reset button, which is every week it's a new episode and everything's kind of exactly the same, which is a very old-fashioned way of doing television. So the truth is, unlike the very, very heavily serialized shows of today, where you watch characters evolve over a long period of time.
Yeah.
The old adage used to be that, you go to a movie to watch a character change, and you watch a TV show to watch a character stay the same, because that's the character you like. But I think you're absolutely right that character in particular, because of the concept of the character,
Yeah.
the fact that he was this kind of blank slate, he was allowed to evolve. So it became fun to write for him, and we would come up with, wow, well, what if the Doctor discovers music, and what if the Doctor discovers sex, and what if the Doctor because he's discovering all these things for the first time. So I think probably the comp is probably Data on TNG.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was really fun to write for.
I think one of the things I always loved about the Doctor's character is how he then became Seven's mentor. So he's almost passing on everything that he had learned through the first 4 seasons.
Yes.
He then, passed that on to Seven.
And he's also very, pompous and full of himself, which to me is really fun it's really fun to write, characters who just think a lot of themselves are very
and
fun.
Especially a character that isn't a villain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
I think that was what made him fun.
I think we turned him into a villain a couple of times. I think.
Yes.
I can't remember all of them. It's funny. I watch the show now. Occasionally, I'll put it on, and sometimes I'll be snapped right back into, oh, I remember that, and other times I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. I have not so long ago, and I think it was during lockdown. I watched a bunch of episodes during lockdown, and I'm watching one episode, and it's B'Elanna is in like some crazy flight suit, and she's jumping out of a I don't know, like an airplane or something, doing some kind of weird 0G like skydiving, and she like lands and she's on the holodeck, and I'm like, that's so cool. And then the credit came up, and I was like, I wrote it. Like literally, I don't know what that says about my memory or my current cognitive state, but I had no recollection of writing it. And I was very curious to see how the episode was going to turn out.
I think
so. You wrote it well, right? Yeah. So I mean, you were still interested.
Also, you were involved.
By the way, some of them I watched some of them, and I'm like, that's not a very that episode's a little cringy, and others where I'm like, wow, this is good. Like, but when you did 26 episodes a year, some of them were going to be real standouts, and others were going to be, well, not our best, not our best.
And
I
also,
think that is
they were churned out really quickly as well. So it's
yes, yeah,
Really
one in, one
quickly.
out.
Really, really quickly, and that's the craziness of this, TV writing and this show running job, which is, at any given time, you are, you have one show that's on the stage being shot.
Yep.
One show that's being prepped simultaneously with a new director that's going to start the minute this other director, the current director, is finished. You have any number of shows in post-production where you're looking at cuts and trying to make sure the shows are good. And then you have a couple of scripts being written and then an outlines being written. So you're working on so many different episodes at the same time. It's kind of a preposterous job, but it's fun. It's exhausting but fun. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's interesting too because with you talked about some episodes hit it out of the park and others you're like, that's a little cringe. But I think that's what made Voyager kind of unique. Them being obviously set apart, they're in the Delta Quadrant, they're away from all the Federation standards that we'd seen in TNG and even a little bit more so in DS9. But I think it was fun as a fan to watch those episodes, and here they are progressing through their ultimate goal, but then also here we're going to kind of take them out of that moment and focus on this story, whether it was a holodeck episode or, and maybe they weren't the strongest episode, but it was fun to see our characters that we were watching interact in something separate from the overall mission. And so I think that was a good balance on Voyager of that.
And also, the two-parters are fantastic.
Yeah, the two-parters were fun. The best thing, as a writer, though, the best thing about the two-parters were, there was I was always, especially when I took over, I went into a panic. I'm like, there's no more stories to tell. There are no more episodes. I mean, there've been, every story's been we could possibly tell has been told. How am I going to now? It's on my shoulders to come up with 26 more episodes. Like I can't do it. So the great thing about the two-parters were when somebody came up with a story and you said to yourself, wow, this could be a two-parter. We could get 2 episodes because you were trying to figure out how you could do 26. Like, how can you come up with them?
Yeah.
So,
I thought it was interesting when Brannon said that the Year of Hell was going to be an entire season.
Yeah,
and
there was a discussion of that.
And what that would have been like.
I don't know what that would have been like, but there was a discussion of that. And the other one, in my recollection, was we were doing our retreat, like our retreat. We went to Brandon's house, I think, and sat around instead of being at the office to figure out. I can't remember which season it was, but it was the season that we did the episode where Voyager ends up on Earth in contemporary times, and I
want to say season 5.
Yeah, Ed Begley's in it. He's the bad guy, and they end up in Griffith Park in Los Angeles.
Actually, no, it might have been season 3. Actually,
I can't remember, but
Futures End season 3.
What my recollection, Brandon might dispute this, but what that came out of was we were at a big brainstorming session, and the ratings had kind of dipped, and it was like, what could we do to like amp up the ratings? And I said, well, if you really wanted to do something crazy, what if the ship just hit an anomaly and it ended up today, contemporary in 1986, and now they lived here with all this technology, and that was the show. Mm-hmm. The show was Star Trek characters in contemporary times. They have to hide and deal, and like we could do a whole season, and it went from like, yeah, there's no way Rick's ever going to approve that to, well, maybe we could do like 4 episodes, and then it got like whittled down into a 2-part. I think Joe and Brandon ended up writing it, but I think that one too. I think we talked about being a longer kind of arc, but I think at the time that there was always this sort of fear of serialization, that the show would get too serialized, and that was I thought it was what was great about DS9, but that was always often a criticism about DS9, or a reason they thought the ratings weren't bigger for DS9, because people couldn't just dip into the show and know what was going on. You had to really have followed along on a story.
Yeah.
So I think there's always kind of a fear of that, where they wanted the episodes to be able to stand on their own. So, but the two parts, yeah.
So obviously this year is the 30th anniversary of Voyager.
Crazy.
Which is a horrible thing to say.
Yes.
If you could change something about Voyager, what would it be and why?
Oh, if I could change something about Voyager, that is a difficult and loaded question. Um, um, I think I would have liked to have done some even more of the serialized storytelling. I mean, I kind of got permission in season 6 where I could have Tom and B'Elanna get married. I could do some of those kind of personal stories where relationships evolved over time. This is probably controversial for the real Trek fans, but I found it constraining at times, this idea of, well, I love the Gene Roddenberry vision, positive vision of the universe.
Yeah.
As a writer, it's very difficult at times, especially when I first came on the show, to be told, well, our characters would never do that. They would never behave that way. They're too evolved to behave that way. They wouldn't ever express a prejudice or have a flaw. And, I think I would have let the characters maybe be a little bit more flawed and make a few more mistakes and have a little more interpersonal conflict. Drama is conflict, and it's very hard because on these shows, because you often were not kind of allowed to put the characters in conflict in a way that, to be honest, feels a little more human to me. But I don't think I would change much. I think the show is, like I said, I go back and I watch it now, and I'm very proud of it. And I think that the characters are fun, and there's some great episodes. And I don't think it needs a big overhaul or anything.
Well, it still resonates, I mean, obviously some of these characters have continued on in some modern Trek series.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's really kind of bringing this new generation of Trek viewers and fans to go back, and they're exploring, TNG and DS9 and Voyager, especially with, Kate Mulgrew in Prodigy, and Jerry Ryan wound up in Picard. Yep. So what is your kind of take on that, seeing these characters coming back to Trek?
If I'm being really honest, I've watched very little of the newer series, not out of any, my television viewing tends to be, I'll dip into something, I'll watch an episode and be like, okay, that's interesting, or I don't like that, or I'll move on. So I watched a few episodes of Picard. I thought it was really well done. I confess I have not seen the animated show, so I don't feel like I can really comment. I mean, I think it's great that the franchise has continued on, and that new audiences get introduced to it. But I'm not really up to speed on the newer stuff.
So, if you had to pick one episode as your favorite, and that could be either an episode that you produced, wrote, directed, which episode would it be and why?
Wow. I wish I had an episode list in front of me, because I just can't I can't even remember too many of them. I wrote an episode where the Doctor fell in love with a Vidian and he went parking.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of sweet, romantic, and I liked that episode. I can't remember what it was called.
Neither can I right now.
I liked the kind of thriller episodes. I wrote an episode, I think it was called like Worst Case Scenario or something, where the cast it brings Seska back. I think the cast discovers that Tuvok had created some training program on the
holodeck,
in case the Maquis tried to take over the ship, and it kind of went sideways, and was kind of a thriller. So I thought that was kind of fun. I'm proud of. I know that not everybody loved it. I'm very proud of the 2-part finale that I wrote with Rob Doherty. That of course Brandon and Rick were involved in creating the story, but I wrote the script with Rob, and I thought it was really challenging because, are they going to get home? Are they not going to get home? Well, of
Hmm.
course they're going to get home. And so it was like, how could we subvert the expectation?
Yeah.
And so when we sort of came up with this idea that, oh, Voyager got home, it got home a long time ago, but not everybody made it.
Yeah.
And the idea that, Janeway was so devoted to her crew that she was going to go
Hmm.
back and try to unravel it and see if she could get everybody home safe and sound. I was proud of that. I thought that was pretty good. I hope it was a satisfying ending for people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So um, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, I think, Voyager, like I said, I think stands out for a lot of people, and I think it continues to, as I said. But I think with Endgame, as you referred to it, you hope people like it. I think it's one of the most underrated finales,
Yeah.
truth be told,
Thanks.
because if you really watch it's cinematic in its storytelling and in its visual presentation, and I think people are gaining more favor of it as of late, just because it sets itself apart.
Yeah.
But it's an enjoyable finale. I only have one problem with Endgame, and that's Seven and Chakotay, but we don't have to go there.
I don't even remember, but
Okay,
yeah,
good.
seems wrong. Seems wrong now that
Yes,
you.
it was wrong.
Yep.
It was. So it's all good. As long as we're in agreement, we're fine.
I accept all criticism of it. I
No,
don't.
that's fair.
Um,
I really do enjoy that. That's one of the best finales I think Trek has seen, and I hope people, continue to watch it and enjoy it for that purpose, because it was good. It's a good
It was
finale.
good. Yep. Obviously, you directed 2 episodes.
I did.
How did
Yep.
you find the transition from to being behind the camera?
Well, it's something I'd always wanted to do, and I've done, lots of it since. I've done a lot of directing since. I'm very grateful to Rick and Jerry that they gave me the shot to do it. I loved it. It was, it was terrifying at first. I think most directors will tell you the first time they do it, it's, you're like looking at your watch and you're going, well, 4 hours can't have gone by. How can I have 20 more shots I need to do? Yeah, I think it was a good way to get my feet wet because it was a friendly environment. I had Marvin Rush, who was the cinematographer, who I knew pretty well, and I'd gotten to know the crew and of course the cast. And so I think people are kind of like pulling for you because it's a hard job. So I really enjoyed it. And was really glad I got to do it. And I would have liked to have done more of it, but when I kind of got the bigger job, it was harder to do because it meant you have to spend a week and a half prepping before your week and a half of shooting, and that's a full-time job itself. So to be it's one thing to be out of the writer's room for a week and a half, if you're just one of the guys, but it's harder to do when you're, in charge. So, what I've tended to do on my shows since then is either, directing like big season openers so I can prep it and do it all kind of before we start, or a season finale where there's no more stories to break. So that's tended to be my pattern kind of since then. Of course, I've directed on other people's shows too, where I'm not the showrunner, but it was a good way to learn for sure.
And
Yeah.
you directed, if I'm not mistaken, it was Revulsion and One, right? Were the 2 episodes?
If you say yes, I don't remember, I don't remember the titles very well, but yes, Revulsion, which stars an incredible actor named Leland Orser, who's gone on to do some stuff, played a insane hologram who killed the crew on a ship, and it was a B'Elanna episode. And that was the first one I directed. And the second one was it called One? It was where 7 of 9 ends up basically alone on the ship because the rest of the crew has to go stasis. And that was fun because she was having like kind of hallucinations about Borg on the ship, and that was a fun one to do.
And
Jerry
with Revulsion, Jerry
go ahead.
handled that so well. But with Revulsion, you also had the B story with Seven and Harry. Do you remember that where they're having to work together to, I don't know if it was for the astrometrics lab or something, and they kind of had that um, campy, fun dialogue about her trying to understand
Sex.
human.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Sexuality. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
I do remember. I mean, that was fun. Seven, you could get, as with the Doctor, you could get a lot of humor out of those characters because they were so serious. That's where the humor
Yeah.
comes. The more serious she was, the less humorous she was, the less sense of humor she had as a character, the funnier she was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a fun kind of back and forth because you kind of had this intense thing happening with the Doctor and B'Elanna and the hologram that's gone off the rails, and then you've got this kind of play awkwardness happening between Seven. That was a fun dynamic between those two, and I think one is one of the standout episodes of the series, truthfully, because Seven. It's true. It really because I think you see Seven kind of learn to embody the kind of mission or philosophy of Trek, where the needs of the many,
right,
outweigh the needs of the few, and I think obviously Jerry Ryan played that hallucination parts and all of that so very well, but it's a strong episode in Trek and a strong episode for Seven's character arc.
Well, thank you for
that.
So,
it was well done. Those are both fun episodes.
I'll have to go back and watch them now that you remind me.
Yeah, you should. You'll enjoy them. I know you will.
I'll probably watch them and go, "Wow, I really messed up that shot." That's usually what happens.
Sure. You see it through a different eye than I think, right? The regular viewer. So I understand.
Do you have a kind of a prominent memory from your time on Voyager? Is there one thing that you remember above all else? Whether it was in the writer's room or...
Oh, well, I mean, I have a lot. I mean, so much happened in my life while I was, I met my wife, we got married on the Paramount lot.
I thought you were going to say you got married on the bridge of Voyager then.
No, but I did get married on New York Street on the Paramount lot, which was really
cool. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
And so I have personal memories that are wrapped up in the show. It was really fun to be, as I said, I got married toward the end of the show, but it was fun to be a young single guy on that show. I have, Renee and Brannon and I were all, young guys in our 20s or maybe late 20s, early 30s together, and we just had a lot of fun. It was just a fun time to be there. I remember the Misery Loves Company because we worked so hard on that show. We did so many episodes that. And the way that Michael Piller, sort of ran things, if there was a story break, you had to be in the room, which meant if you were writing a script, you had to do it, other times. And so I remember all of us being there on Saturdays, sitting in the office. The lot was dead when you're sitting there writing, and so it was kind of a Misery Loves Company kind of thing. But so I have very fond memories, like personal memories of being on the show. I think the fact that it was how I got my directing career started, obviously, is a fond memory. I have a memory of Jerry Taylor being mad at me, which was terrible about something that I said or shouldn't have said, and showing up really, really early at work because she used to come in really early and sitting outside her door with a couple of coffees to try to make peace with her. She was a wonderful lady. She was just very warm and was just a wonderful person to work for. So she will be missed. So I have very fond memories of her for sure. So yeah, I would say those are some of the things I remember about Voyager. Yeah.
You were talking about Jerry Taylor, and one of the things we're doing this year on the podcast is a focus on the women of Trek. Great. And I think Voyager is definitely a standout in all of our series, just because obviously female captain leading a series.
Well, we have people now who think that women shouldn't be in combat. So they should
Oh,
watch some Voyager,
Yes.
and they should be better. They should be better people.
yes,
And
I
so
fully
it's.
agree.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I
No,
did.
please go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it, it maybe it doesn't seem like such a big deal now, and I think it's disturbing that even 30 years ago it was such a big deal to have
Hmm.
a woman be the captain, even in the world of Star Trek. But I mean, I just never thought twice about it.
Hmm.
Kate and the character, was such an authority figure and such a great captain and a great role model. And I've heard young women and women in STEM. I have a daughter who's in STEM, talk about the influence that Janeway and Kate playing Janeway had on them. And I just think that's amazing. And that's part of the great legacy of Star Trek. I take no credit for it. I just got a job to write for this character, but I'm proud to have been a part of that.
Well, and you wrote the words. I mean, you gave them the stories to play with, and I think it's a big component of what we see on screen. I wanted to ask though around this Women of Trek piece that how important was it that it was Jerry Taylor that was kind of heading up this writer's side of Voyager, in particular because of all the strong female characters?
I think I mean, looking back on it, I think it was enormously important. I believe that she was the impetus for having a female captain. I believe that, Rick and Michael said maybe the next captain should be a woman, and if she's going to be a woman, then Jerry needs to be a co-creator on the show with us, and she needs to be the showrunner. I don't remember. For sure, Jerry was a trailblazer in her own right. As I think I started early in this conversation talking about how when I started out, almost all the showrunners were men. So she was a trailblazer in her own right. She rose through the ranks in a world that was very male dominated. And so I think she was her own kind of role model, probably for women like Lisa and lots of other women who are now, Shonda Rhimes and these people who now dominate television. So I think Jerry deserves credit for that. For sure, Jerry was, I can't speak for Jerry's politics, but Jerry was for sure a feminist. I think we all were. I think that's inherent in Star Trek. There's no,
right.
There shouldn't be any kind of sexism or distinction among genders or anything like that in Star Trek. So I don't remember Jerry ever being pushy or political, or we have to do this to make a statement about women. I think she just wanted to tell good stories, and which is what we all did. But I think she was proud of and protective of Janeway's character, as she should have been. So, and she was a great boss. She just was a great boss. We've all had terrible bosses. They make movies about terrible bosses. Jerry was a great.
Yeah,
Jerry was a boss. She was tough when she needed to be. She didn't take any shit from anybody. But she was very caring and nurturing, and she was a great lady. Great lady.
I think, we hear that about Jerry Taylor quite often. And I think obviously that's a testament to not only her leadership and her skill sets, but also to the people that worked with her and allowed that kind of freedom to just accept it as this is how this was, and a team effort. That's huge. I do want to ask also then around the Women of Trek again. So how influential was the way the actors were playing these characters on how their character arcs developed? Did that play into it as the seasons, came and went?
Yeah, I mean, I think what happens is when you start, you're kind of writing in a vacuum. The character is an idea in your head, and so even with Seven, for example, I think was her character. This idea of an ex-Borg was really kind of ingenious, I think, and I'm pretty sure it was Joe and Brannon that cooked up the idea of Seven. Um, and there was a lot of controversy and talk about the cat suit and, oh, it's too sexual. Is it too sexualized? Is it too this? Is it was too that? But once Jerry was playing the role and you could start to hear her voice, and you saw the way that she was playing it, of course, it inspired new ideas and new scenarios that you could put the character in. And of course, she brought, so much more to the role. And then with Kate, you have a perfect example where I don't know if you've ever, seen the footage, but it's so awkward. And you see, for the 2 or 3 days that Geneviève Bujold, who was a terrific actress, was trying to play that role and was so uncomfortable and didn't have any sense of how to approach it. And then, Kate just walks in and owns it. And from the second she walked out on that bridge, you're like, okay, she's the captain. Like, don't fuck with her.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that.
No, you can swear all you want.
So of course they had a lot to do with it. I mean, I think I think a character is a collaboration. I won't name names, and it wasn't on Star Trek, but in terms of horrible bosses, I had a horrible boss once on the show who came in to the writer's room and announced, I won't say the name of the lead character because then you'll know who it was, but he came in and said, "I am this character. This character is me." And I just thought, what a pretentious asshole. And you're not that character. You might be writing words for that character, but there's an actor inhabiting that. So to me, best version is it's like really a true collaboration. And an example is, I had a show for 3 years on TNT called Perception, which starred Eric McCormack. And that character, whose name is Daniel Pierce, who's a brilliant neuroscientist who's suffering from schizophrenia, and that character to me is a total collaboration between myself and Eric. I wrote a script with Mike Sussman, by the way, who worked on Star Trek, that sort of established that character. But over the course of 3 years, Eric and I really collaborated on that character. And so I think that's like the best version of a character is when when a writer and an actor are really in sync on it. And when things go bad is when the actors are saying, "You don't understand my character," which I also don't like, because you want to say back to them, well, it's also not just your character. There's somebody that's conceiving it. So it's kind of a fine line, but when it works at its best, it's a kind of a symbiotic relationship.
Absolutely. I think what I love most about what you're saying, and knowing that Jerry Taylor was a big part of Janeway, but that the writers' room, it wasn't about empowering women. It was that they should be just a part of these stories and leading the way. And I think that's.
I don't remember anybody ever saying, "Oh, we need a woman needs to be at the center of this story, or a man needs to be at the center of this story." Like, it just was not it was not like, "Oh, we need an engineer, it's B'Elanna. Oh, a science officer, it's Janeway. Oh, we need this is a security issue here. It's Tuvok." It was like it was that kind of thing.
But I think it's unusual for the time. I mean, in that era, that was still a lot of male-female lines drawn, and I think especially still in the entertainment industry. So you really were doing something special in that era, and it comes across and still resonates to this day. So you can be definitely proud of that.
Oh, nice to hear. I take this only the slightest amount of credit for.
So, taking a slight break from Star Trek, I want to talk about the 40+ episodes you did on Smallville.
Sure.
Because I love that show. I think most people would say that Smallville redefined the superhero TV genre. What was the biggest creative challenge that you had telling Superman's origin story in a fresh way?
Well, I would start by saying that it was really Al
Yep.
Goff and Miles Miller, who created the show, who really had a vision for what that show was going to be.
Yep.
Um, and so I did what I think is really, even though I got hired at kind of a high level as the co-executive producer to run the writer's room in the second season, and I directed episodes. My job on that show was to service their vision of that show, and I think that's a misconception sometimes is, if you're a writer and you come in on a show like that, your job is to write an episode of that show, not to like create a Ken Biller film or something, right?
Yeah.
So just like I did on Star Trek, even though I was much more experienced and coming in at a more senior managerial supervisory kind of position, I was trying to do essentially what I did on Star Trek, which was I wasn't on the first season, so read all the first season scripts, try to get my head in that space, try to get the voices of these characters. For me, it was a bit of a challenge, even though I was younger then, was like I remember being nervous about, can I write these teenagers? They're teenagers and do they need to speak in a different way? And I think eventually it was like, okay, you just treat them like really intelligent people and write them smart. But that's always a thing on a television show where I'll hire a writer on a show and I'll be like, well, this writer just doesn't get the voices of these characters.
Yeah.
So that was, fortunately I was able to do that. The challenge was also like it had been on Star Trek, was how to come up with fresh ideas for fresh episodes. The genius of that show, to me, at least at the beginning, lay in the sort of brilliant idea of making Clark Kent and Lex Luthor best friends.
Yeah.
So that it's filled with this sense of foreboding that what's going to happen. These two people are going to become arch enemies, and Lex Luthor is going to try to destroy Clark Kent. But right now, they're friends.
Yep.
And so what's gonna happen? I thought that was a brilliant, conceit in that show. Yeah.
So obviously, keeping on that kind of theme,
Sure.
Smallville introduced several iconic DC characters over time. Was there a particular character or storyline that you really wanted to bring to the screen?
I'm trying to remember if I did any episodes that brought, characters out of the universe. Yeah, I wrote I can tell you 100%, which I couldn't on Voyager. My favorite episode is an episode of Smallville that I wrote and directed. Of course, now I'm going to forget the title of the episode. It's
season 2 or season 3?
It would be season 2, I think. It's Lex Goes Crazy and ends up in the Lex Goes Crazy and ends up in the it's called well, I can't think of what it's called.
Yes, I know the episode you mean, but I can't remember the name
but
of it.
But Lionel Luthor, his father, basically has him committed at the end of the episode. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of that episode. It introduced a villain that had been in the DC universe. But I think what I really liked doing on that show was really like writing for Lex and Clark, and the episodes that I directed tended to focus on them. I went back years later and directed another episode, and I cast Bob Picardo in the episode. So I've had Bob a few times on different shows that I've done since then, because I think he's such a wonderful actor, and I got lucky because he happened to be in Vancouver doing Stargate, I think, and he was there already and available to play this kind of, I think he was kind of like an evil priest or something. I can't remember. That episode I don't remember that well, but I've lost the train of your question. I'm so sorry.
That's all right. Don't worry. We'll move on. What do you think Smallville's biggest impact was on superhero television?
Oh, well, I'm not a buff of superhero television, I have to say. So, but I think probably what it did was it sort of expanded the way you could tell superhero stories, right? Because the center of it, at the center of it was a family show and a teenage soap opera. So it wasn't just about Superman going up against bad guys. It was a coming of age story. It was about a young man trying to sort of find his way in the world when it came to love and loss, and how to deal with overprotective parents, and so I think that it probably captured a new audience for comic book stories that might not necessarily have gravitated toward them, because I think it was probably relevant to the lives of teenagers at the time. It was pretty contemporary in terms of its social themes. And it melded the superhero tropes into that in a way. So I think probably if you were to look at superhero stories that have come after it, it's had a big influence. And I think the idea of I guess there have always been origin stories in comic books, but I think it kind of redefined the origin story and opened up what an origin story could be. And so I think it kept to the myth of Superman, which is he crashed in a spaceship and he got found as a baby by the Kents and had this super strength, and so it didn't violate any of that. It just filled in a lot of what was missing, and for that I think it was really compelling. And I was lucky, I think, because in the first season of the show, which I thought had some really good episodes, I think because of what the network was looking for, it was much more what they would call like the freak of the week. There'd be like a different villain every week. And by the time I got there in the second season, I was there for the second and third seasons, we were able to dig much more into the mythology and the soap opera. And I say soap opera not in the pejorative sense, in the sense that we all like to watch the unfolding of characters' lives, and it was kind of a blend of 90210 and Superman, right? So the sort of the teen soap opera mixed in there. So
no, I loved that show. There's another show I just really briefly want to touch on. It's a recent show, and I stumbled upon it about a year ago. It's called Genius.
Oh, yeah.
And essentially each season follows a specific high-profile person. Genius, yeah, because obviously season 1 is Albert Einstein, then it's Picasso, then it's Aretha Franklin. And am I right in thinking you weren't on season 4?
I'm credited on both seasons 3 and 4 as an executive producer, because I created the franchise, but I didn't work on a daily basis on either one of them. I did Einstein, and I did Picasso, and the other ones are my name is on them because I created the franchise, but I didn't have any direct involvement in the production of those shows. In fact, when Aretha Franklin came about, it was an 11th hour shift.
Right.
We had been developing. It had been announced at upfronts that season 3 of Genius was going to be Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, and so I spent a year of my life working on Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, and I think it would have been the best of all of the geniuses. It was really a show about the creative process and a brilliant young woman and all of the League of Incest. It was Byron and Shelley and all of the
Right.
people that surrounded her, and we were telling in a unique way in the middle of it, actually, the Frankenstein story. And when the merger happened between Disney and Fox, because Fox owns Nat Geo, let's just say people above my pay grade killed it and decided that it should be Aretha Franklin instead, because I don't know why, but that's what they decided. So yeah, but I think everybody should watch Einstein, and everybody
Einstein's
should
fantastic.
also.
Einstein is my favorite one, but then I'm a science
Me too.
nerd, so
Me too. Einstein's my favorite too. I mean, I'm very proud of Picasso, but I think Einstein is the best of the bunch, and was the most appropriate for the Nat Geo audience, and I would love everybody to watch Einstein. I think it's I'm very proud of it.
It's a great show. If you haven't watched it, it's on Disney Plus. It's a really good show to watch.
I think you have to unravel it, because when you pull up Genius, it'll come up. Well, now I think Martin Luther King, but and you have to go into the episodes, and then you'll see that the first season is Einstein, and I think it's worth your time, because it's all about Einstein, but you also you meet many of the other brilliant scientists of the day that were in his orbit, and it's also about the politics of Europe at the time, and it's got some great performances in it, and we got nominated for 10 Emmy Awards for that one, and 7 for Picasso, which I'm really proud of. I directed the last 3 episodes of the 10 episodes of Einstein and the first 2 of Picasso. So
Jeffrey Rush as Einstein was brilliant. I have to say on that one.
And so is Johnny Flynn, who plays the young,
and Johnny Flynn is the younger one. Yeah, both were great castings for that one. So
by the way, there's some really, what I will say about Einstein, one of the things I'm most proud of about Einstein is, if you watch the show, it is about Einstein, but it is also about very much about Einstein's first wife, Mileva Maric, who herself was a brilliant scientist who history kind of rolled over. And that's a big theme of the show, and it's really it's a very powerful and emotional story. So
it is.
I wonder how different it is for you as a creative, as a writer and director, producer, between those kind of 25, 26 episode seasons, and now in the era of streaming, these kind of 8 to 10 episodes.
It's much better to make 10 episodes than 26 episodes. I mean, the amount of time and care and attention and detail that you can put into it. I mean, there's no, Voyager, in terms of like visual effects, was very cutting edge at the time, but there's no comparison between, say, the production value of Genius, which was shot on location all over Europe with using incredible real locations. For Picasso, we went to Malaga in Spain, and we shot the scene where Picasso was born is shot in the house where Picasso was born. And the scene in the bull ring where Picasso goes with his dad was shot in the bull ring in Malaga. And the scene in the church where he was baptized was shot in the church where he was baptized. So these are, and we shot in Budapest and Malta and Paris, and so the production values on these shows are much higher. And I love historical drama, so I really loved working on Genius. It's probably I'm very proud of Star Trek, but those 2 installments of Genius are probably what I'm proudest of in my career. They're not that old; they're just a few years old. And I would love people to find them.
But also, that's going to be one hell of an experience, knowing that you're retelling these stories in the places that they were birthed.
Yeah,
essentially,
it was amazing. It was incredible. The idea was to try to be as authentic as possible. I mean, obviously, I'm talking about some specific examples that we were able to do because Antonio Banderas, who plays Picasso, happens to be from Malaga. And if you go to Malaga, they'll say there's two heroes of Malaga, and one is Pablo Picasso, and the other one is Antonio Banderas. So he was able to create access for us to
He
do
ticks
that.
both boxes.
Yes.
But of course, we shot. Einstein was shot in Prague, which doubled for a lot of different places, including Berlin and Prague itself at one point, and then we did New Jersey on a back lot in Prague. It's up at Princeton. Bob Picardo is also plays a part in Einstein toward the end of the 10 episodes. I think he's in episode 9 or 10, maybe.
I think it's 9, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, and then for Picasso, we shot, as I said, in Malta. We shot in Barcelona, for Barcelona, but also for some other places. We shot a scene. It's called El Quatre Gats, which is the very first place that Picasso ever had a show, and we shot that in the place where Picasso had the show, which is still
that's amazing
in Barcelona. So those shows are authentic. They are not history lessons. They're very dramatic and very emotional, and so people should watch them.
Yeah,
because
it's a great show.
Thank you.
If you had the opportunity to return back to the Star Trek franchise, would you?
Sure. Yeah, I probably would. I mean, I haven't been asked, but yeah, I probably would.
Alex Kurtzman, you heard it here first.
Right.
And then, Jodie, just before I ask our final question, do you have any more questions?
I just have one, and I can't let you go without asking this, but one of the episodes on Voyager that
I know what you're going to ask me.
You do? Is it? Are you sure? Okay. But I think you did teleplay for it, and it was Tuvix.
Tuvix. Of course you're going to ask me about Tuvix.
I had to bring up Tuvix.
Tuvix is trying to get away from it.
Yeah. Tuvix has become this incredible, has had this afterlife. I'm not kidding. I've had like PhD students reach out to me, like DM to me on Instagram, asking if they can interview me because they're writing a dissertation about Tuvix. It's really funny because, I didn't even let you ask your question. What's your question?
No, that's fine, please. No, my question just was like, it is one of the most divisive topics in the fandom.
Yeah, and I had no idea. I had no idea that it had become so divisive. I'll tell you the inside story of Tuvix if you want to know.
Oh, please, yes.
Which we bought this. We bought the story. It was kind of a goofy science fiction premise where what if Neelix and Tuvok, who drive each other crazy or annoy each other, get merged, and they're I think the original title was symbiogenesis, because that is a phenomenon that occurs in nature where two species can get merged, called symbiogenesis. Michael Piller read the script and said, "No, you have to call this Tuvix. It's not called symbiogenesis." I said, "Okay, Michael." But it was we approached it kind of as we did comic episodes. We approached it really kind of as a comedy at first, and Brandon and I made up a little song because we thought it was so silly. And the little song was, I can't really sing, but I'll tell it to you. It was something like, "He's Tuvok, he's Neelix, he's two guys in a fix, he's Tuvix." Like it was a little silly, like 50s sitcom. Like they're cousins, identical cousins.
Yes.
And that was and so I wrote a draft, and it was pretty good, but it was played kind of for comedy, and of course the crew, what they do is they solve problems, and they eventually figured out a way to separate them and get their two beloved crew members back. And Michael Piller, because he was brilliant, said, "This is Star Trek." He said, this is a right to life story. This is about something. It's about right to life. And Janeway is the captain, and she's got to make a really, really gut-wrenching moral decision about whether she's going to kill one person to save two others. I said, "Michael, got it. Love it. You're on." So I did a whole rewrite on the script, and that became what it was about. And Janeway, when you're the captain, you got to make tough decisions.
Yep.
Right.
And I know that it's controversial. People, I guess they say, well, Janeway's a murderer. Maybe. I don't know. She saved two of her crew members.
Right.
I don't. What was the alternative? Should she have just said, well, the other two are dead? And maybe. But she made a decision and she had to live with it. And we decided to end it that way, where she just does it and she walks out and that's it. It's done.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided to make it as gut-wrenching as possible. We had that guy beg for his life. And so what started out as kind of a silly little fun, we like to do those fun, like kind of comic episodes.
Yes.
Every once in a while. Trouble with Tribbles, right? Like that's the
Yep.
And that's how it started. And now it's gone on to become 30 years later, like one of the most controversial episodes in Star Trek history. I stand by it. I think Janeway did the right thing, but I love that people argue about it. That just leads back to the other theme of the discussion, which is, Janeway is the captain and she's a badass. She, did she have sleepless nights about it? I'm sure she did.
Mm-hmm. I think what maybe as a tribute to your intentions at the beginning of making it more comedic is Star Trek Lower Decks, which has been one of the more recent animated series, dedicated an entire episode to that philosophy of Tuvix, of members of the crew merging together. And it is, you have to watch it because it is just
Tuvix,
prime.
Spelled Tuvix, Twovi.
Okay. All right, I'll have to find it.
You'll enjoy it, I think, because of that. But I also think it's great that you went in there with this comedic concept of it, and now it's taken on this whole philosophical morality piece. I mean, people writing doctoral thesis about a Star Trek episode. I mean, that's impressive.
That was always the best thing about Star Trek and really good science fiction, which is you can tell these kind of morality tales, or you can tell stories about contemporary social issues, at a slight remove, right? I mean, most of us are never going to be faced with, having to
I hope not.
kill a new species in order to save two people. It's probably not
right.
Realistic, but it's kind of it's a Sophie's choice thing. People have to.
Yes.
Doctors sometimes have to make these choices, and generals at war have to make these choices, and our captain had to make it. And I think the controversy is probably good.
Yeah,
it means people are talking about it, and it makes people think. Which is the best. Star Trek makes makes them smile and they enjoy it, and it's just hopefully rip-roaring entertainment. But at its best, it makes you think a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What would I do? What would I do in that
Absolutely.
situation? I don't know.
Absolutely.
Well, first off, thank you for Tuvix.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Thank you for Neelix, because my cat is named after him.
Oh, that's cute. Tell my daughter that. My daughter loves cats, so she'll be.
I have two cats, and one of them is Ginger, one of them is a Tuxedo.
Well, Barkley had a cat named Neelix, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was Ginger. Which is part of the reason why. As soon as I saw it, I went, right, you're my cat.
I think that was Rob. I think that was a Rob Doherty idea that he
nice.
So gave him a cat.
We love Barkley. We love Reg.
We do.
Reg is lovely. Ken, thank you so much for coming on the show. We have one final question. Really easy. Won't take much thought. Ken Biller, what does Star Trek mean to you?
Oh, it's such a deep question. No, I think I said it. Star Trek for me personally means really the launching of my career. So it has great personal meaning to me, and I think it's a show about a hopeful vision of the future. It's going to sound like a platitude, but we live in a world right now which is so bitterly divided and full of rancor and cruelty, and it's nice to be able to imagine and model a world where people can be better and more caring and more inclusive. And I'm not using that word inclusivity accidentally. I'm saying it on purpose. So I think that's what it means to me. It's a better world than we live in right now, unfortunately, but maybe it can be an example to people to try to do a little better.
Yep, exactly.
Absolutely.
Ken, thank you so much for coming on. For everyone else watching and listening, remember you can catch up with more of us at our Patreon, patreon.com/Clonestar. But until next time, live long and prosper.